The first time Xander Irwin found the knife under her pillow, his blood ran cold enough to freeze his breath in his lungs. He had only been married to Grashka for 3 days, and already he was questioning everything the village elder had told him about arranged marriages bringing peace between humans and orcs. The steel blade was military issue, honed sharp enough to split a hair, and it lay beneath the rough cotton pillowcase like a serpent coiled to strike. He had discovered it purely by accident, reaching to straighten the bedding while she was outside drawing water from the well. His hand had brushed against something hard and unforgiving, and when he pulled back the fabric, there it was, waiting. Ready, Xander stepped away from the bed as though it might bite him. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he pressed one hand to his chest to steady himself. The small cabin suddenly felt too warm, too close, despite the autumn chill seeping through the cracks in the logs. He could hear Grashka outside, the splash of water and the creak of the well rope, and he moved quickly to replace the pillow exactly as it had been. His hands shook. The marriage had been arranged as part of the treaty between Ironhearth Village and the Stonefang clan. After decades of border skirmishes and mistrust, both sides had agreed that a union between their people might foster understanding. Xander had volunteered, partly because he believed in the possibility of peace, and partly because his farm on the outskirts of the village left him isolated enough that the scandal of marrying an orc would not destroy his livelihood. He raised sheep and grew vegetables, and his customers cared more about the quality of his wool than his choice of wife. But standing in the cabin he had built with his own hands, staring at the bed he now shared with a woman who slept with a weapon within easy reach, Xander felt the weight of his decision settle over him like a shroud. When Grashka returned, carrying the water bucket with ease despite its weight, Xander was at the table pretending to review his accounts. She set the bucket down near the hearth and glanced at him. Her green skin caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, giving her an almost luminous quality. Her tusks were small, barely protruding past her upper lip, and her dark hair was braided in a thick plait that hung over one shoulder. She wore simple clothes, a tunic and trousers that she had brought from her clan, and she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who trusted nothing and no one. "You are well?" she asked. Her voice was low and careful, each word measured. "Yes," Xander said, too quickly. "Just checking the numbers for market day." Grashka nodded and turned to the hearth to begin preparing their evening meal. She had been doing most of the cooking since their wedding, and Xander had not objected. She was skilled with herbs and seasoning, far better than he had ever been, and the meals she prepared were surprisingly good. But they ate in silence, and at night they lay on opposite sides of the bed like strangers forced to share a raft on a hostile sea. That night, after they had eaten and cleaned the dishes, Xander climbed into bed and tried not to think about the knife. Grashka joined him a few minutes later, and he felt the mattress shift under her weight. She was strong, her frame athletic and built for combat, and he wondered if she had been a warrior before the treaty. He had not asked. They had not talked about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. They had barely talked at all. He lay awake for hours, listening to her breathing. It was steady and even, the rhythm of someone accustomed to sleeping lightly. He wondered if she was truly asleep, or if she was as alert as he was, waiting for him to make a move, to prove himself the enemy she clearly expected him to be. The days that followed were an exercise in careful avoidance. Xander tended his sheep and worked the fields, and Grashka kept the cabin clean and prepared their meals. They spoke only when necessary, polite and distant, like business partners rather than husband and wife. But every night, Xander knew the knife was there, hidden beneath her pillow, and the knowledge gnawed at him. He tried to convince himself that it was understandable. She was alone in a human village, surrounded by people who had spent their lives viewing orcs as monsters. She had every reason to be afraid, every reason to protect herself. But the knife felt like a wall between them, a tangible reminder that she did not trust him, that she might never trust him. 2 weeks into their marriage, the first snow began to fall. It came early that year, dusting the fields and the roof of the cabin in a thin layer of white. Xander was outside reinforcing the sheep pen when he heard the shouting from the village. He straightened, squinting toward the cluster of buildings in the distance, and saw a group of men approaching. His stomach tightened. He recognized them immediately. Gareth and his friends, young men from the village who had opposed the treaty from the beginning. They were drunk, their voices loud and slurred, and they carried torches despite the daylight. Xander set down his hammer and walked to meet them, positioning himself between the group and the cabin. "Xander," Gareth called, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "We have come to talk sense into you." "Go home, Gareth," Xander said evenly. "You are drunk." "We are concerned," another man said, swaying slightly. "You have brought a monster into our midst. What if she calls her clan down on us? What if this is all a trick?" "Grashka is my wife," Xander said, keeping his voice calm. "She has done nothing to harm anyone. Now leave." Gareth spat into the snow. "You are a fool, Irwin. That creature will slit your throat the first chance she gets." Xander felt his hands curl into fists, but before he could respond, he heard the cabin door open behind him. He turned to see Grashka standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She looked at the men, then at Xander, and for a moment he thought she might retreat back inside. But instead she stepped out into the snow, walking to stand beside him. "You have concerns," she said, addressing the group directly. Her voice was steady, lacking any trace of fear. "Speak them." The men shifted uncomfortably. Up close, Grashka was imposing despite her relatively small tusks. She stood nearly as tall as Xander, and her presence radiated a quiet strength that made the drunken men seem small and petty by comparison. "You do not belong here," Gareth said, though his voice had lost some of its bravado. "You should go back to your clan." "I am here because both our peoples agreed to this union," Grashka said. "I am here because I believe peace is worth the sacrifice. If you do not, then you dishonor the treaty your own elders signed." Gareth had no response to that. He glared at her, then at Xander, and finally turned and stalked away, his friends following. Xander watched them go, his heart still pounding, and then looked at Grashka. "Thank you," he said quietly. She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw something other than wariness in her eyes. It was brief, a flicker of something that might have been respect, and then it was gone. She nodded once and returned to the cabin, leaving Xander standing in the snow. That night, as they prepared for bed, Xander made a decision. He could not continue living like this, in a marriage defined by silence and fear. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited for Grashka to join him. When she did, he turned to face her. "I know about the knife," he said. She froze, her eyes widening slightly. For a moment she said nothing, and then she reached under her pillow and pulled it out. She held it in her lap, the blade gleaming in the firelight. "You are angry," she said. It was not a question. "No," Xander said, surprising himself. "I am not angry, I am sad." "Sad?" "That you feel you need it," he said. "I know I have done nothing to earn your trust, Grashka. I know this marriage was not your choice any more than it was mine, but I want you to know that I will never hurt you. I swear it on my life." Grashka looked down at the knife, her expression unreadable. "Words are easy," she said softly. "Actions are what matter." "Then let me prove it," Xander said. "Give me time and I will show you that you are safe here, that you do not need to sleep with a weapon." She was silent for a long time, and Xander thought she might refuse. But then she nodded just once and slid the knife back under her pillow. It was not trust, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. The winter deepened, and with it came the kind of cold that turned breath to mist and froze the water in the well. Xander spent his days chopping wood and tending to the sheep, making sure they had enough feed to survive until spring. Grashka worked beside him more often now, helping to haul wood and mend fences. She was strong, far stronger than he was, and she never complained about the labor. They began to talk, slowly at first. Small conversations about the weather, the sheep, the supplies they would need. But gradually, the conversations grew longer and deeper. Xander learned that Grashka had been a scout for her clan, responsible for tracking game and watching for threats. She had volunteered for the marriage as well, believing it was her duty to serve her people. "I did not expect to be afraid," she admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "I thought I was strong enough to face anything. But being here, surrounded by humans who hate me, it is harder than I imagined." "They do not all hate you," Xander said. "Most of them are just afraid of what they do not understand." "And you?" she asked, looking at him. "Are you afraid of me?" Xander considered the question. "I was," he admitted. "When I found the knife, I was terrified, but not of you. I was afraid that I had failed you, that I had not done enough to make you feel safe." Grashka's expression softened, and she reached out to touch his hand. It was the first time she had initiated contact, and Xander felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "You are a good man, Xander Irwin," she said quietly. "I did not expect that." Over the following weeks, the distance between them began to close. Grashka smiled more often, and her laughter, when it came, was deep and genuine. Xander found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to hear her voice, to see the way her eyes lit up when she was amused. He was falling in love with her, he realized, and the realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. One night, as they lay in bed, Xander reached out and took her hand. She did not pull away, and they fell asleep like that, fingers intertwined. When he woke the next morning, he found her still beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. And when he glanced at her pillow, he saw that the knife was still there, but it did not bother him as much as it once had. He understood now that the knife was not about him. It was about survival, about a lifetime of being told that she was a monster, that she could not trust anyone. Changing that would take time, and Xander was willing to wait. Winter gave way to early spring, and the snow began to melt. The fields turned muddy, and the first green shoots of new growth appeared in the garden Grashka had planted. She spent hours tending to it, coaxing life from the cold earth, and Xander watched her with a mixture of admiration and affection. One afternoon, as he was repairing a broken fence post, he heard shouting from the direction of the village. He dropped his tools and ran toward the sound, his heart racing. Grashka was already ahead of him, her long strides eating up the distance. They arrived to find a crowd gathered near the village square. In the center of the commotion was a young human girl, no more than 10 years old, who had fallen through the ice on the pond. She was flailing in the freezing water, her screams high and panicked. The adults stood on the shore, afraid to venture onto the unstable ice. Without hesitation, Grashka pushed through the crowd and stepped onto the ice. Xander shouted for her to stop, but she ignored him. She moved carefully, distributing her weight, and when she reached the hole, she lay flat and extended her arm. The girl grabbed onto her, and Grashka pulled her out with a strength that made the rescue look effortless. She carried the girl back to shore and handed her to her sobbing mother. The crowd was silent, staring at Grashka with a mixture of shock and awe. She stood there, dripping wet and shivering, and then turned and walked back toward the cabin. Xander followed, grabbing a blanket from their home and wrapping it around her shoulders. "You saved her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She was a child," Grashka said, as though that explained everything. "What else could I do?" That night the village elder came to their door. He was an old man, his face lined with age and wisdom, and he carried a basket of food and supplies. "I came to thank your wife," he said, looking past Xander to where Grashka stood near the hearth. "What she did today was brave and selfless. You have my gratitude and the gratitude of the entire village." Grashka inclined her head, accepting the thanks with quiet dignity. After the elder left, she turned to Xander, and he saw tears in her eyes. "They do not hate me," she said, her voice breaking. "They do not all hate me." Xander crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first and then relaxed, burying her face against his shoulder. He held her as she cried, and he felt something shift between them, a barrier finally breaking down. That night when they went to bed, Grashka hesitated before climbing in beside him. She reached under her pillow, and Xander watched as she pulled out the knife. She looked at it for a long moment, and then she stood and walked to the kitchen. She opened one of the drawers and placed the knife inside, closing it with a soft click. When she returned to bed, Xander pulled her close, and she came willingly, resting her head on his chest. He ran his fingers through her hair, and she sighed, a sound of contentment and relief. "I trust you," she whispered. "I trust you, Xander." "And I love you," he said, the words spilling out before he could stop them. "I love you, Grashka." She lifted her head to look at him, and the smile that spread across her face was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I love you too," she said, and then she kissed him, her lips warm and soft against his. They made love that night, slow and tender, discovering each other with a reverence that felt almost sacred. When they finally fell asleep, tangled together in the sheets, Xander felt a peace he had never known. The knife was in the kitchen drawer, and Grashka was in his arms, and for the first time since their wedding, he felt like they were truly married. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Xander's life. Grashka bloomed in the warmth of spring, her laughter filling the cabin and her presence a constant source of joy. They worked side by side in the fields, planted the garden together, and spent their evenings by the fire, talking and dreaming about the future. The village, too, began to change. The girl Grashka had saved, whose name was Eliza, visited often, bringing wildflowers and drawings she had made. Her mother came as well, and soon other villagers began to stop by, offering thanks and tentative friendship. Grashka handled it all with grace, never boasting about what she had done, never demanding recognition. She simply was herself, kind and strong and brave, and the people of Ironhearth could not help but love her for it. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Xander took Grashka's hand and squeezed it gently. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving your clan, marrying me?" Grashka considered the question, her gaze distant. "There are moments when I miss them," she said. "But I do not regret this. I have found something here I never expected to find." "What is that?" "A home," she said, looking at him. "Not just a place, but a person. You are my home, Xander." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, the sun had set, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, but their happiness was not destined to remain unchallenged. Late one night, as they slept, Xander was awakened by the sound of hoofbeats. He sat up, his heart pounding, and looked out the window to see a group of riders approaching. They carried torches, and even from a distance he could see that they were orcs. Grashka was already awake, her body tense. She climbed out of bed and began to dress, her movements quick and efficient. Xander followed suit, pulling on his trousers and shirt. "Who are they?" he asked. My clan, Grashka said, her voice tight. They have come for me. Xander felt a chill run down his spine. He followed Grashka outside where the riders had dismounted and were standing in the yard. There were 5 of them, all male, all armed. The one in the lead was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with scars crisscrossing his face and arms. He looked at Grashka with an expression that was equal parts anger and disappointment. Grashka, he said, his voice like gravel. You have been summoned to return to the clan. Why? Grashka asked, stepping forward. I fulfilled my duty. I married the human as was agreed. The agreement is void, the orc said. The human elder has refused to honor the terms of the treaty. He claims we have been raiding his livestock, which is a lie. The council has decided that the marriage was a mistake and you are to come home. Grashka's jaw tightened. I will not leave, she said. This is my home now. The orc's eyes narrowed. You would choose a human over your own people. I choose the life I have built here, Grashka said firmly. I choose love over duty and peace over war. The other orcs exchanged glances, and the leader took a step forward, his hand moving to the hilt of his sword. Xander moved instinctively to stand beside Grashka, though he knew he was no match for the warrior in front of him. Stand aside, human, the orc growled. This does not concern you. It does concern me, Xander said, his voice steady despite his fear. Grashka is my wife, and I will not let you take her against her will. The orc laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the night. You think you can stop me, little man? No, Xander admitted, but I will die trying. The orc paused, studying Xander with a mixture of amusement and respect. Then he looked at Grashka, who had not moved, her stance defiant. You truly love this human? He asked. I do, Grashka said, more than I thought possible. The orc was silent for a long moment, and then he sighed, a sound of resignation. Very well, he said. I will tell the council that you refuse to return. But know this, Grashka. You are no longer welcome among the Stonefang clan. If you leave this place, you do so as an exile. Grashka nodded, her expression solemn. I understand. The orc mounted his horse and gestured for the others to follow. Before he rode away, he looked back at Grashka one last time. I hope he is worth it, he said, and then they were gone, disappearing into the night. Grashka stood in the yard, staring after them, and Xander saw tears streaming down her face. He put his arms around her and she collapsed against him, sobbing. I am sorry, she said, her voice muffled against his chest. I am so sorry. For what? Xander asked, holding her tightly. For bringing this trouble to you, for being the reason they came. Grashka, Xander said, pulling back to look at her. You are not trouble. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I do not care if your clan has cast you out. You are my family now, and I will never let you go. She looked at him, her eyes red and swollen, and then she kissed him fiercely. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. I love you, she said. I love you so much. And I love you, Xander replied, now and always. They stood there in the yard, holding each other, until the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. Then they went inside, and Grashka climbed into bed, exhausted from the emotional turmoil. Xander joined her, and as he held her, he realized that the knife was still in the kitchen drawer. She had not even thought to retrieve it, even when faced with the possibility of being taken by force. The spring continued to unfold, warm and full of promise. The fields turned green, the garden flourished, and the sheep produced healthy lambs. Grashka threw herself into the work with renewed vigor, as though determined to prove that she belonged here, that she had made the right choice. The villagers, who had witnessed the confrontation with the orc clan from a distance, rallied around them. They brought gifts of food and supplies, and several of the men offered to help Xander expand his farm. Grashka was welcomed into the community with open arms, and she responded with gratitude and humility. One afternoon, the village elder came to visit again. He sat on the porch with Xander and Grashka, sipping tea and watching the clouds drift across the sky. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking at Grashka. "I was told that the Stonefang clan had been raiding our livestock, and I believed it without question. But I have since learned that the raids were carried out by a rogue group, not sanctioned by your council. I have sent word to them, offering to resume negotiations for the treaty." Grashka nodded, though her expression was cautious. "I hope they will listen," she said. "But even if they do not, I am content. I have found my place here." The elder smiled. "You are a credit to your people, Grashka. And you, Xander, are a lucky man." "I know," Xander said, reaching over to take Grashka's hand. "I am reminded of it every day." As the elder left, Grashka turned to Xander, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "A lucky man am I, the luckiest," Xander said, leaning in to kiss her. "Though I prefer to think of it as being blessed." She laughed, a sound that never failed to make his heart soar and pulled him to his feet. "Come," she said. "The garden needs weeding, and I will not let you sit idle while I do all the work." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the garden, laughing and teasing each other as they pulled weeds and tended to the plants. When the sun began to set, they washed up and prepared dinner together, moving around the kitchen with the ease of long practice. After they had eaten and cleaned up, they sat by the fire, Grashka curled against Xander's side. He ran his fingers through her hair, marveling at how far they had come from those early days of silence and fear. "You remember the first time we spoke?" Grashka asked, her voice soft. "I do," Xander said. "You asked if I was well, and I lied and said I was checking my accounts." Grashka laughed. "I knew you were lying. You looked terrified." "I was," Xander admitted. "I had just found the knife and I did not know what to think." "And now?" Grashka asked, tilting her head to look up at him. "Now I think you are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known," Xander said. "And I am grateful every day that you chose to stay." Grashka's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and she kissed him, slow and sweet. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence until the fire burned low. That night, as they climbed into bed, Xander thought about the knife in the kitchen drawer. It had been there for weeks now, untouched and forgotten. It was a symbol of how much had changed, of the trust and love that had grown between them. As he drifted off to sleep, Grashka's hand in his, he felt a deep sense of contentment. They had faced challenges and overcome them, and they had built a life together that was more than he had ever dared to hope for. And he knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The months passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Summer arrived, bringing with it long days and warm nights. Xander and Grashka worked from dawn to dusk, tending to the farm and the animals, and their efforts were rewarded with a bountiful harvest. The garden overflowed with vegetables, and the sheep were healthy and thriving. Grashka had become a fixture in the village, and the people had come to see her not as an orc, but as one of their own. She helped with births, tended to the sick, and was always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Her kindness and strength had won over even the most skeptical villagers, and Xander often found himself the subject of good-natured teasing about how he had managed to marry someone so far out of his league. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, Grashka turned to Xander with a shy smile. "I have something to tell you," she said. Xander felt his heart skip a beat. "What is it?" "I am with child," Grashka said, her voice soft and full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Xander could not speak. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words, and then he let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around. She laughed, holding on to him, and when he finally set her down, he saw that she was crying. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Happy," Xander said, cupping her face in his hands. "I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic. I am the luckiest man in the world." They held each other, laughing and crying until the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Then they went inside, and Xander insisted that Grashka sit down while he prepared dinner. She protested, but he was firm, and she eventually relented, watching him with a mixture of amusement and affection. Over the following months, Xander fussed over Grashka like a mother hen. He made sure she ate well, rested often, and did not overexert herself. She tolerated his attentions with good humor, though she often reminded him that orc women were strong and capable of carrying a child without falling apart. The village celebrated the news with them, and gifts began to arrive. Baby clothes, blankets, toys, and advice, more advice than Xander knew what to do with. The women of the village took Grashka under their wing, sharing their own experiences and offering support. It was a far cry from the fear and hostility that had greeted her arrival, and Grashka was moved to tears more than once by their kindness. As winter approached once more, Grashka's belly grew round and heavy. She moved more slowly now, her steps careful, and Xander was always nearby, ready to help. He had never been more in love with her than he was in those final months of her pregnancy, watching her body change and grow to nurture the life they had created together. One cold December night, Grashka woke Xander with a hand on his shoulder. "It is time," she said, her voice calm despite the pain he could see in her eyes. Xander leapt out of bed and ran to fetch the midwife, a kindly older woman named Margaret who had delivered half the babies in the village. She arrived quickly, her bag in hand, and took charge of the situation with practiced efficiency. Xander was banished to the main room, where he paced like a caged animal, listening to the sounds coming from the bedroom. It seemed to take forever, though in reality it was only a few hours. When he finally heard the thin, wailing cry of a newborn, he stopped pacing, his heart in his throat. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face flushed and smiling. "You have a daughter," she said, "and both mother and baby are healthy." Xander rushed past her into the bedroom, where Grashka lay propped up against the pillows, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked exhausted but radiant, and when she looked up at him, her smile took his breath away. "Come meet your daughter," she said softly. Xander approached slowly, almost afraid to move too quickly, and looked down at the baby in Grashka's arms. She was tiny, her skin a beautiful pale green, and she had the tiniest tusks he had ever seen. Her eyes were closed, and she had a shock of dark hair on her head. She was perfect. "She is beautiful," Xander whispered, reaching out to touch her tiny hand. She grabbed onto his finger with surprising strength, and he felt tears streaming down his face. "She is absolutely beautiful." "What should we name her?" Grashka asked. Xander thought for a moment and then smiled. "How about Ilara? It means light." Grashka's eyes filled with tears. "Ilara," she repeated. "It is perfect." They spent the rest of the night marveling at their daughter, taking turns holding her and whispering promises to always love and protect her. When dawn broke, Xander went outside to tend to the animals, leaving Grashka and Ilara to rest. As he worked, he felt a profound sense of gratitude and joy. His life had changed so much in the past year, and it was all because of the green-skinned woman who had slept with a knife under her pillow. But that knife was long gone now, tucked away in the kitchen drawer where it belonged. Grashka no longer needed it, because she had found something far stronger than steel. She had found love and trust, and a family that would never let her down. As the seasons turned and Alara grew, Xander and Grashka settled into the rhythm of parenthood. Alara was a curious and spirited child, with her mother's strength and her father's gentle nature. She toddled around the cabin, getting into everything, and brought laughter and chaos into their lives in equal measure. The village adored her, and she was often seen being passed from one set of arms to another at the market or the village square. The children loved playing with her, and the adults marveled at how she seemed to bridge the gap between human and orc with her very existence. One spring afternoon, when Alara was nearly 2 years old, Xander and Grashka took her to the village for market day. As they walked through the square, they were stopped by the elder, who was accompanied by a delegation of orcs. Xander's heart skipped a beat, and he instinctively moved closer to Grashka, but she placed a reassuring hand on his arm. The leader of the delegation stepped forward, and Xander recognized him as the same orc who had come to take Grashka away. But his expression was different now, less hostile and more thoughtful. "Grashka," he said, inclining his head respectfully. "I bring word from the Stonefang clan. The council has reconsidered their decision. The treaty has been renewed and you are no longer exiled. You are welcome to return if you wish." Grashka looked at the orc, then at Xander, and then down at Alara, who was clutching her hand and staring at the visitors with wide eyes. "I am honored," she said finally, "but my place is here with my family. I have built a life in Ironhearth and I have no desire to leave it." The orc nodded as though he had expected this answer. "Then I bring another message. The council wishes to extend their gratitude to the people of Ironhearth for their kindness and hospitality. They hope that this can be the beginning of a lasting peace between our peoples." The elder stepped forward, offering his hand. "We would be honored to work toward that goal." The orc clasped the elder's hand, and the crowd that had gathered erupted in applause. Xander felt a swell of pride as he looked at Grashka, who stood tall and dignified, holding their daughter. She had done this, he realized. She had bridged the gap between two worlds simply by being herself. As the delegation departed and the crowd dispersed, Xander took Grashka's hand and squeezed it gently. "You are amazing," he said. "We are amazing," Grashka corrected, smiling at him. "Together." They walked home through the fields, Alara skipping ahead of them, chasing butterflies and laughing. The sun was warm on their faces, and the air smelled of growing things and promise. When they reached the cabin, Grashka paused at the door and looked back at the village in the distance. "You ever think about the knife?" Xander asked, following her gaze. Grashka turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but it seems like a lifetime ago. I am not the same person I was when I first came here. I was afraid and angry and so very alone. But you changed that. You showed me that I did not have to be afraid, that I could trust and love and build a life worth living." "You did the same for me," Xander said, pulling her into his arms. "I was alone too before you came. I did not realize how empty my life was until you filled it with light." They stood there, holding each other, as Alara played in the yard. The knife was still in the kitchen drawer, a relic of a time when Grashka had felt she needed it to survive. But she did not need it anymore. She had everything she needed right here in this place with this man and their beautiful daughter. As the years passed, their family grew. They had 2 more children, a son named Thuron and another daughter named Lyra. The cabin was always full of laughter and noise, and Xander often joked that he had gone from living alone to being constantly outnumbered. Grashka thrived in her role as mother and wife, but she never lost her strength or her independence. She continued to work on the farm, to help her neighbors, and to be a voice for peace and understanding between humans and orcs. She became a leader in the community, respected and admired by all who knew her. Xander watched her with pride and love, marveling at how much their lives had changed. He had gone from being a lonely farmer to the husband of an extraordinary woman and the father of 3 incredible children. It was more than he had ever dared to dream, and he was grateful for it every single day. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ilara came running up, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. "Mama, Papa," she called. "Come see what Thuron and Lyra found." They followed her to the edge of the field where Thuron and Lyra were crouched near a cluster of wildflowers. As they approached, Xander saw what had captured their attention. It was a small rabbit, its leg caught in a tangle of thorns. The children were trying to free it, but the rabbit was panicking, making their efforts difficult. Grashka knelt beside them and gently took the rabbit in her hands. She spoke softly to it, her voice soothing and the rabbit stilled. With careful, practiced movements, she freed its leg from the thorns and examined it for injuries. Finding none, she set the rabbit down and it hopped away, disappearing into the underbrush. "You have to be gentle," Grashka told the children. "Even when something is scared, you can help it if you are patient and kind." Ilara nodded solemnly, and Thuron and Lyra looked at their mother with adoration. Xander watched the scene, his heart full to bursting. This was his life now, and it was perfect. As they walked back to the cabin, Grashka slipped her hand into Xander's. "Do you remember when you asked me if I ever regretted marrying you?" "I do," Xander said. "I have my answer," Grashka said, looking at him. "I regret nothing. Marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You gave me a home, a family, and a love I never thought possible. I am so grateful for you, Xander, for all of this." Xander stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "And I am grateful for you," he said. "You are my heart, Grashka. You always will be." They stood there, holding each other as their children played in the yard and the sun dipped below the horizon. The knife was still in the kitchen drawer, forgotten and unnecessary. Grashka no longer needed it because she had found something far more powerful. She had found love, and in that love, she had found her home. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows and biting winds that howled through the valley. Xander and Grashka spent their days keeping the fires burning and making sure the animals were safe and warm. The children loved the snow, and they spent hours building snowmen and having snowball fights, their laughter ringing through the cold air. One particularly cold night, as they all huddled around the fire, Ilara asked Grashka to tell them a story. Grashka smiled and pulled her daughter onto her lap, and the other children gathered close. "What kind of story would you like to hear?" Grashka asked. "A love story," Ilara said. "About you and Papa." Grashka glanced at Xander, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath and began. "Once upon a time," she said, "there was a young orc woman who was sent to live among humans. She was afraid, because she had been taught that humans were cruel and dangerous. And when she arrived at her new home, she slept with a knife under her pillow, ready to defend herself if needed." The children listened, their eyes wide, and Grashka continued. "But the man she married was not cruel or dangerous. He was kind and patient, and he showed her that not all humans were the same. Slowly, she began to trust him, and as she did, she realized that she no longer needed the knife. She realized that she was safe and that she was loved." "What happened to the knife?" Thuron asked. "She put it in the kitchen drawer," Grashka said, smiling. "And there it stayed because she had found something far more powerful than steel. She had found love." The children sighed happily, and Ilara snuggled closer to her mother. "I love that story," she said. "So do I," Grashka said, kissing the top of her head. As the children drifted off to sleep, Xander and Grashka sat by the fire holding hands. They did not need to speak. The warmth of the fire, the sound of their children's breathing, and the knowledge that they were together was enough. When spring finally arrived, bringing with it the promise of new beginnings, Xander and Grashka took the children to the village for the annual festival. It was a celebration of the renewal of the treaty between humans and orcs, and delegations from both sides were present. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and a sense of hope that filled the air. Grashka was greeted warmly by the orc delegation, many of whom she had known since childhood. They marveled at her children, and Xander saw the pride in their eyes. She had not been forgotten by her people, and they respected the choice she had made. As the sun set and the festivities began to wind down, Xander and Grashka found a quiet spot on the edge of the square. They sat on a bench, watching their children play with the other kids, and Xander felt a profound sense of contentment. "We did it," he said softly. "Did what?" Grashka asked. "We built a life together," Xander said. "Against all odds, we made it work, and look at what we have created. A family, a home, a future. It is more than I ever imagined." Grashka leaned her head on his shoulder. "It is more than I imagined too," she said, "but I would not change a single thing." They sat there as the stars began to appear in the sky, and Xander thought about the knife that still sat in the kitchen drawer. It was a reminder of where they had started, of the fear and mistrust that had defined their early days. But it was also a symbol of how far they had come, of the love and trust that had grown between them. The knife would stay in the drawer, untouched and unneeded, because Grashka had found her place in the world. She had found a home, a family, and a love that would last a lifetime. And as Xander held her close, he knew that he had found the same. Years turned into decades, and their children grew into strong, capable adults. Alara became a healer, using her mother's strength and her father's compassion to help those in need. Thuron became a farmer, taking over the land that Xander had worked for so many years. And Lyra became a diplomat, working to strengthen the bonds between humans and orcs. Xander and Grashka grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down. But their love never wavered. They spent their days sitting on the porch, watching their grandchildren play and reminiscing about the life they had built. One quiet afternoon, as they sat together, Grashka turned to Xander with a soft smile. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. "I do," Xander said. "You walked into my life and changed everything." "And you walked into mine," Grashka said. "I was so afraid that day. I thought I would never find a place where I belonged. But you showed me that I was wrong. You showed me that home is not a place. It is a person." Xander took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing it gently. "And you are my home, Grashka. You always have been and you always will be." They sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined as the sun began to set. The knife was still in the kitchen drawer, a relic of a time long past. But it did not matter anymore. What mattered was the love they had built, the family they had raised, and the life they had shared. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Grashka rested her head on Xander's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They had faced challenges and overcome them, had loved and been loved in return, and had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in the quiet of that evening, with the stars shining above and the sound of their grandchildren's laughter drifting through the air, they knew that they had found everything they had ever needed. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had found a love that would last forever. The knife stayed in the kitchen drawer, untouched and forgotten, because Grashka no longer needed it. She had found her home, her family, and her heart, and that was worth more than any weapon could ever be.